right, everyone, welcome to Top Secret News Radio Show with Christina George and Renee Chavez. We have a special guest tonight with us. Many people have been asking about our guest tonight, and I am happy to say that we have Preston Bennett with us tonight. He's going to be here talking with us, discussing his book, Inside UFOs, True Accounts of Contact with Extraterrestrials. And what's so amazing about this is, well, a lot of UFO books, just talk about a lot of old cases. This book actually has really cutting-edge, new UFO research. They've got 2 new original cases of extensive contact. They've got a wide variety of ETs that are presented in the book, including various types of rays, praying mantis-type ETs, humanoids, and Nordics. And the witnesses are normally everyday people who, suddenly find themselves in some really strange and unusual situations. And so he talks about a lot of that. So super excited to have him here tonight. And, Renee, I know you are. We've been talking about this, I think, ever since I contacted Preston to book the show. And I definitely think that it is going to be a really good show. And for people who might not know Preston for any reason, Preston Bennett began investigating UFOs and the paranormal back in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He's a field researcher for the MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network, which we know well because Des Rooney is one of the assistant state directors, and she is actually also part of our paranormal team and helps to lead our UFO division. He's also a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and an author of 20 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and paranormal. His articles have appeared in numerous magazines, including Fate, Atlanta Rising, MUFON UFO Journal, Nexus, Paranormal Magazine, UFO Magazine, Mystery Magazine, Ufologist, and others. His writing has also been translated into several different languages. He's been on numerous radio and television shows, including Midnight in the Desert with Art Bell, Coast to Coast, History Channel's Deep Sea UFOs and UFO Hunters, and his research has been presented in the LA Times, LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and many other newspapers, and he's even taught classes on various paranormal subjects, and he lectures across the U.S., and he currently is out here in not Los Angeles, in the Southern California area, and we welcome him tonight to the show. Welcome, Preston.
Hey, thanks very much. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we appreciate you being on the show. Actually, as I said, we, at the beginning of the year, or at the end of the year, I had put out a post across social media about guests that our listeners would like to see this coming year, because we've just had such a wide variety of different guests across the board, and your name actually came up quite a few times, and then I was contacted by Devlin, and I thought, this is perfect timing to have you on, and you booked something else, I'll tell you, very, very interesting book. And I would say that, I love the fact that it is current or more recent eyewitness accounts that maybe everybody doesn't already know about, because it seems like a lot of books people are just writing about cases that are well known and everybody seems to know about or have an opinion on it. So these are kind of newer ones. Maybe some people have heard about them somehow before the book, or maybe they never have, but those are the ones that interest me, are the new things coming out.
Right, I totally agree. Yeah, these are all new cases. They've never before been published, so probably no one's heard of them. Not that I have anything against Roswell, but it's kind of like beating a dead horse. And, I still want to see that UFO in a museum one day. I don't think we should let go of the case, but yeah, you're right. Most books aren't new cases, and that's why I'm really excited about this one.
Right. Now, so where did you find the people for your book?
Now, it's really interesting. All over the place. It started out, when I got involved in UFO research, one of the reasons I did was because I found out that, like you said in the intro, so many people I knew were having encounters. So that's kind of how it started, and I built up a network. So I get a lot of referrals through sort of family, friends, and coworkers. But beyond that, all over the place. Whenever I speak, I have a number of people come to me. At least 2 people in the book, I got their stories that way. One was actually organizing a UFO meeting, and the other had come to attend it. And he approached me afterwards. One lady was from work. This is really interesting. I don't really advertise that I'm a UFO guy at work, or I work in an office doing bookkeeping and billing. So not really, the UFO plays.
Right.
But I love my coworkers, and we're all very friendly with each other. And one day, Connie, she walks in. She was in a separate department. She's in the billing department. And she walks into my office, and I just happened to have a little statue of a gray on my desk that someone gave me, a gray alien. And she sees it, and she lets out this yelp, screams, and she says, "What's that?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you think it is?" And she says, "I don't know, but I saw one of those." And I'm like, "Oh, really? Because that's a gray-type ET, and tell me what you saw." So, yeah, I included her case in the book. So all over the place, really. I get a lot of referrals now through email, because I've got, a lot of books out on the subject.
Right. Well, what actually, first got you involved or piqued your interest in the UFO research that you do? Because I find with all the people I've interviewed that usually there's some kind of personal reason behind why people get into the research aspect of ufology. Or the paranormal as well.
Right. Yeah, I was actually repelled by this, repulsed by it. Did not believe in UFOs, or for that matter, in ghosts or life after death or anything paranormal, and thought that most of my family didn't. I was pretty sure that nobody believed in that, and we were all level-headed, so to speak. But then, I don't know how this piqued my interest, but there was this report on the news. I think it was like Dan Rather or Tom Brokaw, one of those major guys, was talking about this sighting. This was back in 1986, like around November, when this Japanese airliner pilot saw a UFO over Alaska. The whole crew saw it, and it was on radar, and it followed their plane, and there were other witnesses. None of this was in the news report. All they said was, "Oh, this pilot saw a UFO, ha, ha, ha." They kind of laughed nervously and joked about the subject. But I thought to myself, my God, this pilot is out of his mind. He's got to be lying, or he's misperceiving, or he's on drugs, he's hoaxing. I don't know what's going on, but why would he do that? And I was, kind of disturbed by it. And it interested me just enough to ask, I remember my brother said he saw a UFO, and none of us really believed him or asked him about it, so I went and I asked him. He described this incredible encounter where he and his 2 friends chased a UFO basically across the San Fernando Valley here, a structured craft, passing other cars that were chasing it. And my sister-in-law, she saw a UFO. She had with 2 friends over Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base. I'm like, oh my God, why did you not tell me? She's like, well, would you have believed me? And I'm like, well, maybe not. So that's how it kind of started. It wasn't just, my family. There was other people in my family, a bunch of people at work, several friends. One lady at work. And I bring this subject up, and Diane, I'll call her, says, "Oh yeah, my whole family saw a UFO, and it was darting around. We all watched it." And Dorothy walks in. She says, "Oh, I saw a UFO. Me and my best friend, we were driving home from the library. It takes us 5 minutes. and this UFO was following our car. And it's so weird, Preston, it took us an hour, and I don't know what happened to the time, an hour and 15 minutes. And this UFO just darted away after we got home. So we had missing time.
Right.
It's something, too, because you just never know, because, like you said, you're just a normal guy, never believed in the subject, everything, just never really paid it any mind. But until, you start asking questions, and if you ask it in the right circles at times, all of a sudden, more of these stories are starting to come by, especially when within your own family, and then, workmates and so forth. All these stories are starting to come out, and it's like, there must be something to this, because the more I ask, the more people are asking me, and all of a sudden, you find out there's a lot more out there than we realize, and so now it becomes not just asking questions, now it becomes a study.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it freaked me out really bad. I felt scandalized. This wasn't taught in schools. I'm like, you guys lied to me. You didn't tell me. You should have let me know this was going on.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy when that feeling comes across? Because I've had that situation happen as well, and it's like the reality that, a majority of the things that I was taught or, either in school or in church or wherever was a bunch of BS, where everybody was trying to make me think I was crazy. I wasn't crazy at all.
Yeah, I had to adjust my whole worldview, and now I'm much more skeptical of everything, kind of, because I sort of question things now.
Yes. Because we did grow up in a time where you didn't, as a child, we didn't question anything. What an adult told us or what we were taught was, or what we heard in church was law. I mean, you didn't question. Why would you? You didn't question your government, or if the news said this is how something happened and this is why it happened. We took that to be true. And now that we see all the examples of, being lied to, it's really mind-blowing. And then, like you said, you really have to adjust everything and think, wow, how easily I was, deceived. Well, now especially if you're a researcher, I think it makes you a really good researcher, because you're not quick to jump on what the masses are going with, unless you can find something to actually back it up with. It's just people's opinions.
It was so upsetting to hear that not only my friends were keeping this from me, but the government was as well. So my tax dollars were going to cover this subject up and ridicule witnesses and debunk the phenomena in a public way. So that's why I'm like, hey, no, this is not right.
Well, we've talked on this show many times about even Area 51. It was always deny that it ever existed. And then eventually when they can't deny it anymore, then just admit it and just, twist it. So, okay, yes, it does exist. All right, you got us. It exists, but it's not what you think it is. So now it's just, we just have to have somewhere to test our top secret stuff and keep it under wraps. Okay, sure. Like, we're going to fall for it a second time. Yeah, at this point, people are like, I don't think so. You told us adamantly that this place, did not exist. None of this stuff. And as things started leaking out, all these, 10 and 20 years later, now all of a sudden people are like, oh, wow. If you would lie to us about this and this and this and this, and there's just more compiling, why wouldn't you? And especially in ufology, because so many people's reputations have been ruined because of their belief or their knowledge of UFOs. So it's just crazy. And how interesting that, Kira, you worked at, this with this job, and you wanted to keep this very, very quiet because, of course, you felt like if, you talked about this, anybody else would think you were crazy. And the crazy thing is that then when it does come out, nobody really looks at you like you're crazy anymore. Now people are like, oh, you too? And I think that we're shocked because that's, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you would have, you might not have even had a job in the next day. This crazy person is having a psychological break, because he thinks he's seen UFOs, but now it's like, okay, now everybody's going to have a share party at the office about their experiences, encounters, of either seeing a UFO or being contacted or abducted.
Exactly, yeah. If anyone's skeptical, that's what I ask them to do is, ask people you trust, your family, your coworkers, your friends, and I think you'll get a real surprise because a lot of people are having these experiences. And, now it's much easier than it used to be. There used to be a lot of ridicule.
And that's the thing. And that's the thing now, too, because now more people are having these encounters, and of course we see how media handles it, and even they get lost in the whole, their own lives and trying to cover up. Even the government gets lost in their own cover-ups, and, it was this, but no, now it's this now. And so that kind of throws everything off. So now people are starting to question the government. What do you really have at Area 51 or Wright-Patterson? What are you guys really working on? We had the space shuttle, we had all these rockets and stuff like that. But then, we're talking about, reverse engineering, flying these other unusual crafts that are ours, so now the cat is kind of out of the bag, and people are starting to think a little more and question a little more. So I think that's kind of let the cat out of the bag, so to speak. So now the government's running out of things to say, what to call it. So
yeah. I don't think the UFOs are going to go away either. It's can only turn forward.
I agree. The only thing is that now, it's what my issue is we know that there are craft up there, but are they actual extraterrestrial craft, or are they our own back-engineered craft to trick us into thinking it's something different?
It's a real problem. Yeah, because I think we do have the technology. I mean, it's not just Roswell that crashed.
Right.
I've written a number of books on various states. UFOs over California, they have like a dozen crashes. New York has crashes. Every state I've written a book on, Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, they all have UFO crashes. So I think it's a lot more common. And we have this hardware, we have the alien bodies, we have the proof, we have the alien technology, and there's still a cover-up. So it's a difficult situation.
Right. And, when all this was happening, you think that it's especially back then, would be very, very, very easy to cover up a crash. Because back then, again, right away, the police would be called, the military would be brought in, they would cordon off the area, nobody would be able to get anywhere near to be able to find out anything. They would make up some kind of crazy story, start a fire, after they've cleared away. In the middle of the night, they would airlift with helicopters, the saucer out so nobody would see. It's not like people now pay attention to the skies and when things are happening. They're looking at, but back then they didn't. And so you could do all of this very, very easy. Now, and then of course we didn't have social media, and we didn't have these drones that, the neighborhood kids could fly in and get a, look at. We didn't have any of that kind of technology, or the, Facebook Live it or any of these things. So it's a much different time. So of course there could be so many down craft that have been recovered at this point that nobody would ever know about, that weren't, and I think the ones that were in areas where a lot more people would have been attention would have been brought to a crash. If it's say at nighttime or in more rural areas where they're either crashed or brought down, those would be very easy to cover up, and we would probably never ever hear anything about them. And if anybody did think they see anything, of course, back in those days, they would never ever want to claim that that's what they think they saw, because of the fear of being ridiculed as well. And then if there'd be a cover-up story made, and off on we would go with our lives.
Right, yeah, the whole UFO press situation is, I'm very unhappy with how our government or who's ever, dealing with this situation, how they've handled it. It's a travesty. I mean, to ridicule witnesses, and some people are having a really difficult time when aliens appear at the foot of their bed, and next thing they know they're on board inside a UFO, and they get no support.
Right, and the next minute they got men in black at their front door telling them not to speak about this. So, yeah, I mean, that could be pretty darn crazy. And it's like, who can you reach out to for support when you're going through such a traumatic experience? Back then, there really wasn't anything. They didn't have these support groups like we have now, and, groups so that, on Facebook, so that people with similar experiences that can, be there for each other. We didn't have any of that. So, it's
everything was, because everything was so limited back then. They had, Project Blue Book that, started, taking all this information and so forth. And then we also had, we have MUFON, trying to get all the data and stuff like that of these encounters and sightings and so forth. But then what happens after that, So now we got, hypnotherapists to help you do regression in case you did have some missing time, to figure out what happened in that window of time that you don't remember. Were they taken? Because whether we're having this missing time and so forth. And then after we do all that, now we need to have some kind of a support group, because they need to really talk about it, because sometimes they're pretty traumatized of what happened to them. They don't know who to talk to. So, they feel better when they talk in the numbers, or maybe one-on-one. So that way they can get it out more to, feel more relaxed instead of terrified all the time. So.
Yeah, I think we're on the brink of busting into the mainstream, honestly.
Yeah.
The evidence, conclusive evidence is out there in the public arena, really. You're just willing to look for it. But the main media is not covering it. That's why, shows like yours are where people are going to for information, because it's not on TV.
Right. And that's exactly the reason why we created this show, was because this is not the stuff that you're going to see on mainstream media. We're, on a more alternative news network, and it's all about getting the truth out there. And so, again, we're not here to convince anybody of anything. We're out there to put the truth out, what we feel is the truth, and move forward. And, again, we've had so many people come. There is so much evidence out there pointing towards it. It's just like, it seems though like so many people are still waiting for this whole idea of quote-unquote disclosure, as if, again, this craft is going to, land on the White House lawn, and they're going to come out and, the government is going to announce this, here are the aliens. Like, it's just not going to happen. I keep saying, like, disclosure is already here. We're in the midst of it, and we are disclosure. And, it's us changing the way that we see things, and just finally taking that final leap of, yes, what we see and the evidence that backs it up shows that, we do have enough to assume that there is life outside of us.
And that's an interesting point, too, because when you think about disclosure, everybody's always looking to, pilots and astronauts, because, they're, they know how to handle things like that when it comes to something like that, because it's all scientific. So these are legit people, to talk about this kind of thing. But when you think about majority of all the cases are just plain Joes, just plain people, even people who never even know what a UFO was or what aliens are, other than what they see on TV or whatever. But these are the ones that are being reached, because, they're not going to be all, as defensive or being so connected to the government, shoot first kind of thing, to try to make this kind of contact. It's they because people think about Hollywood, think take me to your leader kind of thing. It's like, oh, we've seen what your leaders are like. We want to talk to you. You talk to your leader, kind of thing. So.
Well, it's an interesting point that I was just going to say, it's an interesting point that Renee is making. And with your research, since you wrote this book, did it vary? What did you find, like the people who had experiences and gave you their reports, like what types of jobs did they hold? Was it all over the place? Did they have anything in common? Like, what did your research show?
Right. Well, I certainly analyzed it to death, let me tell you. I'm looking for patterns. It was evenly divided between men and women. There was no bearing on race that I could find, or education, or religion, or even age. I mean, total different age range. There was some loose patterns. I found that some people who are being contacted do seem to be doing good for humanity in some way. These are particularly people who've had really benevolent healing contact. I wrote a book called UFO Healings, and I found that the people who were being healed were social workers, inventors, doctors, police officers, entertainers, writers, that kind of person, someone who's actively in society trying to make it better in some way. It's a loose pattern. I can't say that it's very strong, but I noticed it. In this book, Inside UFOs, though, it's all different people. There's one guy, he's a Navy corpsman, a medical guy. Another guy, he's a Navy electronics specialist. There's one who was a paper boy when he had his encounter. He's now a college professor. Another teacher. There's the lady from work, Connie. She's does office work, clerical work. A housewife. Another medical assistant. So basically, some are really good witnesses, actually. I mean, the two Navy guys, I was really pleased to talk to them, because it's always great when you get someone who's a trained observer. And they both had their encounters on a Navy ship with other witnesses.
Wow.
And taken on board the whole deal. Yeah, everyone in this book has had either a face-to-face contact, missing time, or an onboard experience. Most of them on board.
Wow.
So, yeah, these are all really extensive cases.
It's amazing too when you find all these different people from all walks of life, even in in religion, when they are taught that doesn't take place. Then that's they always say it's demonic, whatever. It's demons. So you can't have those kind of experience. But when they have it themselves, it kind of changes the way they look at it. Their perception totally changes. And they start to develop more of an understanding of things, even to a kind of a spiritual state, in fact. So it kind of it changes your whole perspective in life, and what we've learned in school about history, what we learned, from the news and another television, supposed documentary kind of things of, about the subject and about the history. In fact, there's a lot more to it than we realize when we start seeing things from the alien point of view. What's going on?
Right. Well, that's kind of an interesting point, because what I noticed that was a major theme in the book. People who have contact are transformed by it. They become very interested in alternative areas, which really speaks towards the alien agenda. I mean, when someone's I think they have multiple agendas, to be honest.
Right.
When someone is taken on board, probably what I hear most is they're physically examined, and genetic material is taken, samples of, physical samples, so to speak. And but beyond that, when the aliens talk, whenever they give a message, it falls into three main areas. This is, my opinion, according to my research, but I think it's bared out by other researchers as well. The first area would be alternative energy. People are shown the engine room and told, this is how our craft works. and you don't need to use fossil fuels, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a case like that in the book. Also, alternative healing or spirituality, that comes up quite a bit. A lot of people, after their experiences, after their encounter, become healers or channelers or psychic readers or something like this. And the third area, and I think this is probably the most prominent and turns up again and again, quite a few cases in the book, where the ETs warn people of upcoming disasters or environmental changes, such as nuclear proliferation. They're all about that. Lots of warnings about that. Warnings about pollution, warnings about overpopulation, our warlike ways, things like this.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're all about. And I think that speaks towards the alien agenda.
And when you think about those three agendas, definitely fits together in all forms, because we look how we're treating the earth. We see what kind of things that we're using, that we factor up, using factories, and we're just pumping pollution left and right, using all kinds of chemicals. Matter of fact, even for medical stuff, we know we take medical pills instead of something that would be natural to help heal ourselves. And we still use combustible fuels, fossil fuels still, and all these things, and plus the way we treat each other. If we would have had that more of a spiritual connection, we would learn to be able to take care of each other as well as the planet, as well as we want to keep the environment safe so that we can have, sustained life and for future generations. And, we want to travel to space. Well, you think they want us to come up to space with our kind of attitude? Probably not.
No, right. Don't think so. I think there's some indication of that as well, yeah.
Well, when you were off... Oh, go ahead.
I don't think they're here to invade us and take over and, eat us for breakfast or what have you. I don't think there's any evidence of that. I don't think they're demonic. I had to study demons. I studied angels. I studied all kinds of spirituality, the saints. I really looked into this in all aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm convinced we are dealing with biological aliens from other planets. Perhaps they can travel interdimensionally. There's a lot of stuff they can do that looks like magic, but overall, their behavior falls under the same umbrella as human behavior, but is skewed towards benevolence in that I haven't gotten any cases where the ETs are sadistic, trying to hurt people and enjoying it, which you definitely see on Earth. I mean, it would be easy for me to prove that humans are evil or demonic than it would be for the aliens.
Very true.
Yes,
Very true. Well, one of the questions that we're getting from Melinda, and she's from Texas, and she's chiming in from Twitter, and she's wanting to know that with the witnesses, what kinds of ETs are being reported? Are they all grays? I mean, what are you finding out?
Right. Well, most of the people that I talk to do see some variation of the grays, but I do get all kinds. I mean, here's an interesting. I never get like the same type of ET, it seems like. For example, one lady in the book, Connie Lopez, who I mentioned briefly, she had just had her baby son. This was some years ago. And ETs definitely seem to express an interest in reproduction. I get a lot of cases where women are 8 months pregnant or 9 months pregnant or just had their baby, and this is when the grays will show up. And she woke up, she heard this kind of squeaky noise, like someone washing dishes and rubbing their finger against the glass, that sort of noise. And she looks over at her picture window. Her baby is sleeping right beneath it in their master bedroom. And there's this gray alien standing there. And it's looking at her baby. And she's freaking out. Yeah, it's looking at her baby, looking at the mobile hanging above the... Never looked at her, but just really interested in her baby. And it's rubbing the window, trying to open it. Now, mind you, and this is so weird, the window can't be opened. It doesn't open. It's just, a closed window fixed to the wall. And this alien can't figure it out. And here's another weird detail, which I have not, I've heard it in other cases. This is the first case I have like this. It had suction cup, like octopus suckers on its fingers, which I have heard of, but that's my first, right? It's a weird detail. So that's different types of grays for sure. Well, she ended up, just to finish this story, she jumped up to get her baby, and this E.T. somehow was able to slam her down into bed mentally and keep her there paralyzed, unable to move. She could feel the tears falling down her face, but couldn't cry out, couldn't wake her husband, who was sleeping inches from her. And this thing just stares at her baby, who was, less than a week old, for about 2 minutes, trying to open this window. Now, why he didn't walk through the wall, like, a lot of them do, I have no idea. But
how interesting that right away, my mind, as a mother, is thinking, oh, that's horrible, what's it trying to do to my baby? But then the researcher side of me says, actually nothing is indicating that it's there for any kind of negative reason. It could be there just, visiting as it does, the mother. I mean, who knows the backstory, but, there's no signs that, the alien is there to take the baby or hurt the baby, but as a parent or even just listening to things like that, it's funny how our minds immediately think that if they're there, it must be for some bad reason.
Yeah, well, she was absolutely terrified. And I noticed that, people have had that same encounter type of thing, and to them it was benevolent. It didn't hurt her, other than, it did paralyze her, which I think that's what really upset her. She was afraid it was going to take her baby.
Right,
It eventually walked off, and she broke free, woke her husband up, scooped up her baby, woke up the husband. She was screaming, and the husband's like, oh, you just had a nightmare, And she's like, no, I didn't. Next morning, she goes off to live with her mother for a couple of weeks. And I have to tell you, she ended up, when she came back, they bought 2 guard dogs. Wasn't enough. They ended up moving because of this incident. She just could not handle it.
But did moving stop it? Because I would think that, if it was truly, following or being interested in the baby, it could go anywhere. It's just like, a spirit. It's not bound to the home where they live.
Moving doesn't work, generally speaking. It was an isolated experience for her. She never had an experience before or since. But,
wow. Thank goodness.
That's kind of a typical gray encounter, but I get a bunch of encounters of praying mantis-type ETs, kind of described as, praying mantis insect or grasshopper or even ants, I've heard it, or insectoid.
Yeah.
And ranging in height, I've got 2 of these in the book. One's 9 feet tall, which is really tall, but the other is 15 feet tall.
Wow.
Which is an outlier, I call that, because I've not heard that. But Kevin, he's a Navy corpsman. He insists up and down, says, Preston, that's how tall it was. I was with him for about an hour. He was taken off a Navy ship and had a really benevolent encounter, actually, and described him as being 15 feet tall, milky white skin, kind of crab-like hands, a giant head, eyeballs as big as basketballs. Our whole head, he said, could fit inside one of their eyeballs, and just massive skull and brain. And he talked to them for a half hour, and they told him all kinds of stuff.
Wow. So when you're doing the research for your books, how many people would you say, as the people that you interviewed, had left these experiences with a negative feeling or a feeling of fear that, oh no, this is going to happen again, opposed to the other half that, usually are contact where they're given information, and there's really doesn't seem to be any kind of traumatic or experiences or medical procedures or anything like that.
Well, I always ask people, do you think the ETs were evil? And almost no one will say that. But I do get a lot of people who have had traumatic experiences, or what they perceive as unpleasant for sure. And it's kind of half and half-ish. It's hard to say because the worst kind of thing you get, in my experience, is people who are treated like lab rats. The ETs have sort of an arrogance and don't understand human feeling. One lady, she had an experience, which is in the book, where she got really sick. She had like hypoglycemia or something. And suddenly, was, in her living room, walking towards the couch, she found herself inside what appears to be a underground base or something. It was huge. It had a dome ceiling. There was carpeting on the floor, industrial carpeting, cubicles. The whole entire room was lined with cubicles, and she was in one of them. And so were other people she could see. And suddenly this 12-foot-tall figure comes bounding down the hall towards her and lays her down on the table, says, "It's your turn now, Jill," and starts doing this whole kind of examination procedure on her. And she's terrified. And she's screaming bloody murder while this guy does his thing, wraps her up, puts these kind of instruments on her which start pulsing energy into her body. And it's kind of painful, actually. And not pleasant. And suddenly, it's over. That's all she can really remember. She wakes up. And she's now standing up. She's back in her living room. And she can't wake up her family. She's running around the house trying to wake them up. But, following that incident, her illness cleared up instantly. She was no longer, falling asleep after eating, losing consciousness. And she lost a bunch of weight. Her weight started coming back. It was overall a healing experience. But she was taken again, and, they showed her a hybrid baby and said, "Oh, this is yours." And just treated her with arrogance and unfeeling. And she felt like a lab rat and doesn't understand why they took her. She's just a housewife. Doesn't understand who this ET was. That's why she contacted me. Because what she saw was absolutely unique. I've never heard it before since this 12-foot-tall figure with a very broad face, wearing a cape, tight kind of jumpsuit uniform, orange straw-like hair sticking straight up, a huge, huge forehead. A humanoid is what I call it, but I don't really have a category for it. So.
Renee, does that description sound familiar of any species that you know of?
It sounds familiar. There are, because there's literally millions of different species out there. So he was like tall and the skin was like what? Was that described?
Just sort of normal to pale. Pretty much normal.
And what did you say about the face again?
A very broad face, she said. It was, he had eyes, a nose, mouth. Normal for the most part, except as he got closer and closer, she realized how tall he was, for one thing. And he was just, his face was way too large. The chin was way too large. And the forehead
so it looked human, but just
an
overly huge human face?
She feels it was an ET. She says, "I don't think it was human. I really don't." And, I have to agree with her. She was there. I kind of have to let the witnesses speak for themselves. And that was an unusual ET for sure. But I also get Nordics, ones that look just like us. Beautiful, generally speaking. They're described as gorgeous, looking very much like twins or brothers and sisters, tan, muscular, usually wearing jumpsuits. I got a couple of cases like this in the book. One guy, he was 11 years old, I believe, went out to deliver a letter for his mom, knew exactly what time it was, because, he's 11 years old and he's going just 2 blocks away, but still a youngster. It was 9 o'clock, and was supposed to return right home, and his mom's like, what happened? He got home at, after 10. Well, as he was walking home, suddenly he looks up, and there's this giant mother shit type thing right over the building, right on top of him. You can see the grid work. You can see it perfectly. And there was a flash of light, and that's all he remembered, except as he was walking home, because he felt completely changed. He was utterly transformed. He was more aware than he's ever been. He was enlightened. He could think faster. He knew things. He couldn't describe it, but I've heard people struggling with this before. And he spontaneously recalled over the next few days and weeks what happened. Didn't have to go under hypnosis. And recalled seeing these Nordics, beautiful Nordics wearing jumpsuits, and they had long spiritual conversations.
Wow. Well, we're going to have to take a pause there because we're at our break.
I run into that fairly regularly. One of the first cases I got involved that. The lady at work that I was telling you about, whose whole family saw a UFO darting around. Well, the daughter, she called me up and said, well, these things showed up in my bedroom, and she described these gray-type ETs. She said she was fully conscious. It scared the wits out of her, and she's fighting them. And they said, don't be afraid. We need you to come with us. And she started arguing with them, saying, no, I've got a job. You can't take me. I've got a boyfriend. I've got a family. And they said, no, you need to come with us. And suddenly she found herself inside a UFO. She assumed she saw low ceiling, rounded walls. She was on a table, and she's fighting them. And they're like, we need to cut your arm. And she said, no, don't. And they did. And they said, well, we're going to do an operation on your brain. And that just flipped her out. And that's all she really remembers, except waking up the next morning and having this scar on her arm. And she's like showing me this scar like the day after and telling me this story after I just heard about, all their family having sightings pretty regularly, it turns out. And then the mother, a few months later, had this experience where she's taken on board and shown hybrid babies. The typical case, this was actually before Bud Hopkins' book Intruders came out, which sort of cemented this into the UFO culture. So I got it from the beginning, and I've had it at least 20 times or more. Many times. There's 2 cases like that in the book. One guy, he's a medical worker. He had experiences his entire life, starting as a kid with figures coming to his bedroom and culminating in a fully conscious encounter. He didn't go under hypnosis. He recalls being taken on board, and the ETs told him, they said, this is why we took you. You wanted to know and you needed to know this, and showed him a hybrid baby. And he was repulsed, actually. At the same time, he felt intense love for this thing, and he was also really angry at the ETs. So he's swirling with all his emotion. And mind you, this is a fully conscious encounter, so he's completely freaking out. And it goes on from there. But yeah, I run into it. It's one of their agendas. It's not the only one. I think a lot of people have this encounter without ever experiencing that. Like Kevin Ken and the Navy corpsmen, they took him just to tell him about future disasters. That's my opinion, but that's the main thing that happened. And another guy, his name is Jim Kubelbeck. He's a Navy electronics specialist. He had a really interesting encounter, and no, he was never physically examined or anything like that. So it's just one of their agendas.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to having hybrids, have various purposes. Whether it's they're trying to help their species to survive with a mixture of the DNA, and no different than when they try to do when they do some other type of experiments mixing with the DNA, whether it's a mixture of things so they could be able to survive in various planetary environments. and so forth too. So that's also plays a really big part in it too. So they can easily to be adaptable. And Earth is so full of different environments. We got the oceans, we've got cold climates, we got the hot climates, and so forth. So they kind of designed it so because it's a rough planet to live especially when you're not from here. So they're just trying to work it out so they can have these hybrids to live among the Earth and learn as well, and at the same time teach. And so these are some of the things that they have these hybrids doing.
Yeah, I agree. I think these guys have got to be related to us. The Nordics look just like us. The Greys are interbreeding with us. What's going on here? In a lot of cases, I wrote a chapter about this in my book, Not From Here. The ETs say that we are related. Say that we are you and you are us, or one day you will look like us, and all the variations of that. And the fact that the Nordics look just like us, I think, really raises serious questions about who we are and where we came from.
That's a good point too, because in all aspects of the universe, all have this thing to say that we're all connected, and that's the part down here is being human. Still have to learn to adapt to accept that we are connected, even with people here on the earth. We're all different races, we have different cultures and so forth, but we are still all connected if we really look deep enough within ourselves. And yes, we have the same problems just like everybody else. We have various attitudes and so forth, but when you get down to the very cell of the soul, our soul consciousness and everything there, once those see each other, the more in common that we start to connect. And I think that's part of the big thing too. And once we start learning that part, the more we'll be able to extend outward. And that's what a lot of times where a lot of civilizations seem to disappear, because some of them did accept it and did make those changes, and then they were able to be taken off to colonize other worlds as well.
Right. Well, I think we're trending towards open official contact. I can't imagine it going any other way. So maybe it'll happen to us. I don't know if we're quite ready yet, honestly, but...
Yeah, just here in the States, we're having trouble trying to get along with each other and with all the different things that are going on, and as well as the world. So still have a lot to learn, and that's why they're very selective to coming, they have these encounters with various people all over, feeling if they're ready for it, then they'll start, sometimes it's through generations, they follow a family bloodline, and they just kind of follow along until they get to the certain point and where they're going to take it from there. So it's not just the Greys. Reptilians do the same thing too. They have kind of the Star Child program that they have.
I don't do a whole lot of reptilian cases myself. I've certainly heard several accounts firsthand and talked to people about it, but I don't get a whole lot of them. Not compared to 70% about. There's probably some variation of the Greys, then praying mantis, then Nordics, and then kind of a catch-all category. There's just so many.
Yeah. And like you said, there's various agendas there. Some want to be able to teach things about environment. Some want to teach things about natural health kind of thing. Others want to teach about the new kind of physics that we don't really have, but we do if we look for it. All these different things, and so they're just trying to teach us how to grow up. You don't just go ahead and hand it to them, to just anyone, because when you give someone too much power, what happens usually? They use it for destructive purposes.
Right. They can heal people. In my book, UFO Healings, it's 100 cases. Mm-hmm. And I think they know better than to give us the healing technology, because I think we probably would have used it But, I just thought of another one of their agendas in the chapter of one of my books, not from here.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote about it. It's mining. They are very interested in our mines, our iron mines, our uranium mines, all of them. When you go down the line, there is a list of encounters of, well over 2 dozen in which they're hovering over these places, landing at them. People are seeing humanoids, and some of these mines are being physically affected.
Mm-hmm.
They're interested in our precious metals, just so everyone knows that. Definite pattern there.
Yeah. I know gold was used quite a bit, even through the early ages, too, when there was more of it at the time. But now, even in the human world, we use gold in a lot of things, too. That becomes part of our currency, so to speak. So, yeah, it's definitely used for electronics. It's used for all different kind of other devices. Even the space program uses it quite a bit too, because it's a great power conductor. I mean, it just it runs pretty fluent. So they have ways of getting all these other materials from the Earth, but they also do something in exchange without having to damage the Earth. Humans have trouble how to do the exchange program as far as, when they mine something, they have to put something into it so that it doesn't become like a catastrophe that would cause any kind of hazards.
Right.
You still there, Christina? I think she dropped. So, in a lot of your cases, how do you go about into doing the research of them? Anything that catches your eye, or that you've heard about them when they message you, or when they email you, or whatever? How do you actually choose going into the actual investigation?
Well, certainly I get a pretty steady stream of people contacting me with questions or wanting to share their story. And after doing it for so long, start to get a feel for people and who's telling the truth. Only very rarely would I say that people are hoaxing. By and large, people will open their stories by saying, with some variation of a phrase like, I'm not crazy, or, I don't do drugs, I've got a good job, I'm well educated, I've never told this to anybody, and there's other red flags, I would call them, that can indicate when someone's telling the truth, because these are rare details, or somewhat rare. Now it's a lot easier to get a hold of these sort of things, but details that not a lot of people might know about, what it's like inside a UFO,
mm-hmm.
or to meet an ET. But when I first hear someone's story, I get really excited if they've got an actual story. A lot of people have, they see bizarre lights in the sky, or anomalous lights, and there's not a whole lot of information in that kind of encounter. But when someone reveals that they, saw an ET face-to-face, say, or had an onboard experience,
mm-hmm.
then I do an initial interview. I do a follow-up interview. I try to get interviews with their spouse or their, family or friends, and go from there, depending on how big their case is. I always get really excited when I get a hold of, some of the people in the book, like a Navy corpsman,
right,
or the Navy electronics specialist. That's awesome. Not to, say that a housewife doesn't have an interesting story to tell, but you can kind of tell when people are sincere too. I mean, when their emotions start gushing up and they become very wary, and they don't want to tell you what happened because it's embarrassing, maybe, or scary, or what have you.
Because they're more worried on how they're going to, how you're going to accept it if it's, you know, a real story and everything, because, you know, they figured that no one else would, you know. It's just the fear of the humiliation kind of thing. Hold on a second. Joe, I think we lost Christina. Could you possibly get Christina to come back on? You need to call her back in. Calling Joe. Yeah, I'm getting messages from Christina. Can you get Joe to call me back in? So hopefully he gets the message to call Christina back in, because she dropped like a hot potato. But you know, it's interesting about a lot of the subjects that come through. I mean, I know a lot of the stories may sound like really out there, but you know, there's times when you really have to really sit and listen to them speak, and you know, even by the sound of their voice, even too, when they're talking about it, you know, they got that nervousness in their voice, and you know, kind of afraid to really talk about it.
Right. Well, I always ask people, you know, can I use your name? And you know, several people in the book said yes, but one guy's like, no, please don't. And asked me several times, and I'm like, yeah. I find something, no, I won't use your name. He says, well, you better not. So this is not someone who's obviously hoaxing, right? And his story was, you know, actually a pretty interesting story. He was a paper boy and went out to deliver papers, and down comes this fiery ball of light hovering right over him. And it's dark at this time. His bike is full of all the papers that are waiting to be delivered. And the next thing he knows, it's daylight, and at least an hour has passed. He's had missing time, so he's freaking out. He's delivering all the papers as fast as he can, and all the people are standing on their porch. They're really angry, waiting for their paper, and gets home, and his mom's furious. You know, the paper company is calling, and he's just exhausted. He goes to bed, and following this incident, he just got weaker and weaker, and got to the point where he could not get out of bed. Parents could not figure out what happened. He didn't really tell them that, you know, what is he going to tell them? This thing stopped over him. He didn't know what it was. He had never heard of UFOs. He thought it was a plane of some kind. He was kind of an aviation buff, even at that age. And just had this awful weakness. They rushed him off to the hospital at some point, and they could not diagnose it, and gave him a vitamin cocktail. This is something that I've heard from several witnesses having similar problems. And the vitamin cocktail didn't do any good. And for that summer, he was just ruined. He stayed in bed, couldn't participate in school activities, and couldn't, you know, had to drop the paper route. It was just a disaster, and they never did figure out what happened to his parents. But eventually he did recover. He became a college professor and had a relatively normal life, other than I think he has had encounters his whole life, because he had some markers of that. As a young boy, there was this family story where he saw this bald man staring at him, hovering from the second window, looking in.
Oh, wow.
And it freaked him out, and that was when he was younger. So I'm like, that's a pattern, you know, which I'm sure you've heard, where these encounters occur throughout life. And later, as an adult, he was having these nightmares of this kind of short, monstrous-looking creature running around his bed. Well, they actually started out with his daughter. Seeing his daughter, who was, you know, 5 years old, running around his bed, and it scared the daylights out of him. And suddenly, she transformed into this kind of alien-looking thing. And I'm like, oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. You know, when it comes to your, you know, the people who come to you, how many of them actually had repeated contacts?
I'm going to say, well, let me think about that for just a second. There's Kevin Cannon, his experience where he was taken from a Navy ship at Praying Mantis. That was the only time he ever had that experience. Coincidentally, his twin brother was later abducted by Greys and did not have any other experiences. One guy, the guy who I mentioned earlier, who had Nordic encounter at 11 years old,
Mm-hmm.
Following that, he had encounters with grays, and they went on his whole life and continue, pretty much to the present day. Let me see. There's another guy whose case I haven't talked about. His case is very interesting. He's a full-blooded blood Indian, a Native American, and had some really benevolent encounters in which it started out where he would take his whole family up to this lake, I believe Priest Lake or somewhere up in Washington or Idaho, and they would watch what he called nocturnal lights, which were these oval-shaped UFOs that were way up there, and they were whizzing around way high up in the sky, sometimes a few, sometimes a dozen or more, but usually way high up there, until one time, they're up there and they're watching these lights whiz around, and one comes swooping down right at eye level. They're overlooking the lake on this bluff, and it comes down, right in front of them, 100 or so feet away, and the little daughter, she's just a little thing, says, "Daddy, Daddy, they're talking to me. I can hear them." And she says, "What should I do?" And Stan, the guy I interviewed, says, "Tell them you love them." And so she says in her little voice, "I love you." And at that point, this UFO flares up really bright blue and comes towards them and flies low over their heads and off into the distance. So a real kind of interesting, interactive, benevolent encounter.
Yeah.
Right? And he's got a bunch of these things. And one involved where this UFO came over him while he was camping out and was giving off these warnings, coming closer and closer, and thing. And he felt fearful each time it came close, and thought it was trying to warn him, but he couldn't figure out of what until he got home the next morning and realized there had been a family emergency. But here's the best encounter. He was driving along a road early one morning. This was up in Idaho. It's a bright, sunny day, and suddenly he starts to feel kind of drowsy and sedated and weird, and he pulls over, and this silver sphere, the size of a small house, maybe a room, lands in front of his car, right, just 20 feet ahead of him on the road, covers the road. It's shiny, bright silver like a mylar balloon, perfectly round, and a door opens up, and out steps this handsome-looking Nordic, beautiful human being, he said, a man with very dark hair, dark eyes, kind of Arabic-looking, wearing a blue jumpsuit and silver boots, and very handsome, he said, walks out of the craft, walks up to the car and kind of raises his hand and waves at Stan, who's overcome with absolute, joy and just utter feeling of, "Take me with you. I want to go with you. Please take me with you." And as soon as he thought that, the man's smile kind of just dropped. His hand dropped, and gave him one long last stare, turned around, and walked back into the ship, and it took off.
Wow.
Weird, right?
It's like, well, we've given an answer, yes or no, not just walk off. I've heard so much about the Nordic types and the Pleiadians. They seem to have this physique and the look, kind of like, like, geez, forget the supermodels. I mean, you're looking at these, these beings that are perfect in every way, just like, it just seems so amazing. It's just kind of hard to really classify it or describe it because they look so, so amazing. So yeah, they're very beautiful beings. The women and the men, they just like, you guys like work out? I mean,
yeah. I think they've got perfect genes. ETs are all about the genes, right?
Right.
Genes and humanity, for that matter. So I think that's what must be going on there. They're like, this is what we're sort of, I don't know, we're gene engineered that way, but it certainly seems like that because they're so identical looking in a lot of cases.
Wow. And, I know we've heard about the different, other beings, like there's, different grays too as well. From, various sizes, you got these little, 4-foot ones, and then you got, the taller guys. So they all have their specific duties, like we've heard that they have, a lot of medical knowledge, and then you got your science division.
Right.
Some are
officers.
yeah, it's like I don't want to get across to a police officer. Don't pull me over if I'm flying my UFO too fast. But so what particular story that was told you that really affected you deeply, that you're really moved by?
Right. Well, I have to say it's probably the first chapter I put in the book, which was, Kevin Cannon. I mentioned him briefly, but how it started, it's actually a really amazing story. He's a Navy corpsman, and his friend, who he had bunked with on the ship, a personnel clerk, they became really good friends, comes out of the blue and says, you know what, I'm a UFO contactee. And Kevin's like, well, what are you talking about? Kevin always believed in UFOs. He did a school paper as a kid on the subject, and believes in it, but here's his best friend saying, no, actually, I'm in contact with aliens. They've taken me to their planet and other planets. I've been in contact with them since I was a little boy. And Kevin's like, yeah, right, I want to see your little green men. And his friend says, okay, I'll ask them. And he comes back a few days later and he says, well, I just went to your house. They took me to your house. And Kevin's like, well, what do you mean? They're on the ship out in the middle of the Mediterranean or somewhere, Philippines. But his friend says, yeah, I saw your house. I saw your car there. It had the milkshake stain on the seat. I saw your furniture, the orange carpet. He's describing everything. And Kevin is freaking out because this is all accurate, but it's like 15 years in the past. The car was sold. And this guy had time traveled into the past and went to his house.
Wow.
So Kevin's like freaking out. And so the next day, or a couple days later, his friend walks into their bunk there, their dorm, and says, okay, they're up on deck, go up and you can meet them. And Kevin's like, what? He says, oh, go ahead. So Kevin walks up on deck, and lo and behold, the ship is like 600-odd feet long, is this craft, a diamond-shaped kind of thing, flashing colors, twice as big as the ship, hovering right up and alongside it. Just hovering there. And Kevin freaks out. He does the first thing he should do, get another witness, which he did. He ran over to, the mess cook there and grabbed him by the shoulder and was trying to get his attention and could not, for some reason, get his attention, and suddenly finds himself on this ship, the UFO, looking down at the Navy ship, which is rapidly receding into the distance. And so he's on board. He's too afraid. He's terrified. He can't believe this is happening. He did not want this. He said he did, but now he doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's too afraid to look around and see who's behind him or who's piloting this thing. And he's entranced because he's looking out the side of the UFO. He looked down, he could see grid work, kind of like a fire escape, he said, metal grids. And looks outside the UFO and it turns transparent wherever he's looking, like a window. And they fly to his hometown in Illinois, Kankakee, Illinois. It's daytime there, which couldn't be, it should have been nighttime, I believe is what he figured out. So he was confused at what time this was as well. Was it in the past or what's going on? Hovered over where his mom was teaching in, the church school there, then flew over to where his dad was working at a bank building. He says, I could see through the building. I could see the grid work. I could see the plumbing, the electrical wires, I could see everything, and he saw his dad there. And the ET started talking to him in his head. There's at least there was 3 different voices. One did most of the talking, all male, and said, "Your parents are very honorable people." He's like, "Oh, well, okay." Now he's freaking out, doesn't know quite what's going on. They go to another place. They see him he sees himself in the past. He sees his grandmother, who is now deceased. They take him. Suddenly he's over a planet or something. He's looking down. It looks like desert, but it's all gray, and he starts seeing craters, and he's freaking out. And he's like, "No, this looks like the moon." Comes up over the top of it and sees Earth way off in the distance. So at this point, he finally gets his wits around him, and he starts asking the questions. And says, "Who are you guys? Where do you come from?" And suddenly, the room kind of expanded around him. This is something he said that I rarely hear, but it turns out the room seemed to change size. Mm-hmm. And he was in the middle of like a star field, and you could see Earth, you could see Mars, you could see our sun, and all these star systems off in the distance. And way, way, way off in the distance is this little red light, and it's blinking on and off. And they said, "That's where we come from." And so he starts asking questions, "What do you eat? And are you going to eat me?" They're like, "No, we're not going to eat you. We eat normal foods, fish and fruit." And they said they were in touch with all the major governments on Earth. They said they speak all the languages on our planet. They said they've been observing us for a very long time, but have been paying special attention to us since we started exploding nuclear bombs. Mm-hmm. Which they said started off a countdown clock, and that our destiny will be fulfilled. They never said exactly what that meant, other than this is where they took him to start seeing all these disasters. He says it was one after another. It was full color, like he was there. Hurricanes, tornadoes, lots of hurricanes, more hurricanes, earthquakes, mining disasters. They showed him in the future driving this Honda motorbike that hadn't even been invented yet, having a motorcycle accident, and he thought he died in the accident, but that was kind of it, the whole experience. But there was some he didn't remember, and a lot of it left his mind for some time until he saw this praying mantis on TV, and suddenly it came flooding back.
Yeah, it's amazing how that happens too, because I think that happens to a lot of experiencers who had cases like that of visitations or abductions from various types, and they could just be watching something on TV or something off a movie, and they see something, and all of a sudden that would trigger a memory right off the bat, and sometimes it could be traumatic at the time, or they find themselves having a very vivid dream because a certain memory had opened, so they kind of trigger these the emotional response.
Right. It's interesting. Some people do use hypnosis. In this book, only 2 of the 10 cases involved hypnosis. Most are conscious recall. But one of the guys who did do it was the paper boy, whose story I mentioned earlier. And I forgot to mention that. Yeah, he ended up going under hypnosis. And at that point, had actually read quite a bit of UFO literature. Contacted this hypnotherapist who said, "Well, you've kind of read too much to make this terribly useful. It may very well be contaminated by what you read," is what the therapist told him. And he kind of agreed. And he ended up doing it anyway, and recalled not seeing grays. He saw they had yellowish skin, actually, and bluish skin. And he was extremely terrified, so scared he kept passing in and out of consciousness as he lay there on this table, and they were just examining him. A very typical and largely benign encounter. But he didn't recall what he had read, which I found interesting.
It is interesting.
And ultimately, he's like, kind of felt ambivalent about the whole hypnosis thing. I'm a huge supporter of hypnosis, actually. I think it's an accurate tool. I think that's been proven numerous times, not only in the UFO field, but in police work and in experiments. So I totally believe in hypnosis. I just don't always recommend it. It's not necessarily...
It depends, on the type of hypnosis. Because a lot of the cases, they find themselves doing it as a first-person basis when they see themselves, and it causes them to relive it. There are other hypnosis that you're in there as a third person, like you're watching a movie, so you're kind of disconnected from it, so you actually see it, like you're watching a movie take place, what the encounter was. And it helps you to recall various parts that you didn't see, which was around, because your mind catches everything even through your peripherals, but you don't really pay no mind to it. But the brain does remember a lot of the details, but it's a matter of opening up that doorway to be able to catch it. So when you go through that kind of regression, you'd be surprised how many things that you're able to remember without having to get the trauma from your first-person view in the hypnosis.
Right. And people should also realize that if they do it, they might be opening a can of worms. Like, maybe it's not just one encounter, right?
Right.
They've been having it their whole life. So that's something to keep in mind. And I usually recommend it for people who had a very clear-cut case of missing time and are interested in it, or have anxieties or panic attacks because of their encounters, or just dead set on. They're like, I personally would probably do it if I had clear-cut missing time, because I want to know. I'm really interested. And if I can't remember, and there are other methods, through dreams, like you mentioned, meditation. I remember I interviewed a lady, Melinda Leslie. You may have heard of her.
Right.
She's pretty well known in this field. She has encounters, and afterwards she'll meditate and is able to recall it. And she's been able to consciously recall a lot of this stuff, as have, John Hunter Gray, another experiencer, recalls it all without hypnosis, just spontaneously came back, just like the guy who saw Nordics. So that's, if you meditate on it, that can also bring back memories.
It's I always found interesting about these kind of memories, how they open up too, because a lot of times the extraterrestrials will leave markers, it's like a time release memory. When they want you to remember something, sometimes it could take years for that memory to open, because they want to make sure you're ready for that gradual step to get to that point. Okay, now it's time to remember this incident, what we did. Then it's going to take you to the next point. You're going to remember this experiment that we did. So it's kind of like a time release too. So it won't be so much of a shocker to you, depending on where we are at that time. So it's amazing how that actually works, because I think that's some of the things that they found more effective to be able to help them to groom them, so to speak, where they need to go.
The missing time is, they're trying to cover their tracks. They're trying to, be nefarious and hiding what they're doing. But that's another reason, is to sort of reduce the trauma. And one case, a guy I interviewed up in Washington went with his mom and his brother to a drive-in one night. This weird fog comes rolling in so fast, they gave up watching the movie. Everyone did. They're driving home, inch by inch, when they come upon this giant spotted skunk, an impossibly large one. He can't see it at all. He's sitting in the back seat. There is no skunk. But his brother and his mom's like, it's right there. Suddenly, he finds himself floating up into this craft. And that's all he remembers. And didn't remember it until, he was an adult and had children, and was just eating his food one day and cracked his wisdom tooth, and it all came flooding back as he remembered first these ETs operating on his mouth. And then he remembered everything. He remembered being inside this thing. They were arguing about whether put him back down in the car or not, about to take his family, and a whole bunch of stuff. They dangled him outside the bottom of the craft and did some weird stuff. They threw all these mathematical symbols at him, took him to his house. He was up there in that thing for 5 hours. Came down and it was like light, and they drove back home.
Wow. Well, we're almost about 6 minutes. What are some of the best ways for people to get in contact with you or information where they can get your book and so forth?
Yeah, thanks. I have a website. It's actually my name, so if you type in my name, it should take you there. The actual address is PrestonDennett.weebly.com. I got all my books there. I've got excerpts there. You can buy the books through the website or Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever. But you can also contact me through my website. My email is on there. But yeah, I'd love to hear from people if you've got an experience or got an opinion or a question or a story to share. I'm always interested in this subject. I've been doing it for 30 years and got more books coming out in the future, and really excited about this whole field and how it's going to bust wide open.
I always found that, the more I look through things, like we mentioned in the beginning of the show, that we've heard about the Roswells inside and out, backwards and forwards, sideways, and of course Area 51, and Betty and Barney Hill case, all these other cases that are out there in the mainstream and everything. It's really exciting when we actually hear fresh new stories from the people, these experiencers, because even though they're from different people and some are very different, but yet there's some kind of connection, and you're trying to put the puzzle together, especially when we're trying to talk about their agendas, we see that there's different ones, but yet there's still some kind of connection. Then when you mentioned about the 3 different agendas, but they all seem to go hand in hand to our survival. If we want to be able to survive, to be able to explore, we got to fix our problems down here.
Exactly.
We have to fix ourselves, and we have to fix the problem. We need to care more for the earth and the way we live. Quit fighting amongst ourselves. Enjoy that curiosity that we once had when we were children.
Right. Yeah, I think this is a very serious subject. It has the potential to solve what I call the 3 E's: the energy crisis, the economic crisis, and the environmental crisis. I mean, all 3 major subjects we're really struggling with right now. And that's what they're all about. And it's funny, Kevin Cameron, the guy who saw the praying mantis ETs, they were telling him all this stuff, but they said they would not discuss religion or politics or race at all, which is kind of interesting and bizarre because those are big issues we're really dealing with right now.
And I think there's a reason for that, though, because when you think about it, all these different things about our politics and everything, it's like, that's your guys' problem that you got to figure out. Because, and of course, when we talk about races, if we are offended by that race in that country over there, or how they do their politics over there, how they, worship, whatever deity they serve over there, and it just, they have that conflict. But how we're going to, handle extraterrestrials the way they live if we can't handle the things that we live together here? We got some serious things we got to fix down here before we can maybe.
Yeah, that's a major thing, I think, preventing open official contact with the ETs.
Exactly. So it's very important that we really need to look at ourselves as not just a man or a woman, but as beings ourselves before we can extend ourselves further. And I think that's what they look for. We have to grow up.
Right. And hopefully we can do it because they're working hard to make it happen before we destroy ourselves.
And yes, for sure. And so many people, we hear all these protests that are going on there. what's going on in North Dakota. They're fighting about, the pipeline and everything. We need to go through other types of fuels, other ways that'll be safer. But, it's that change we need to make if we want to do better things, to find different fuels that doesn't harm us.
Right. That's what we're all about. That's just one of the stories in the book is precisely that. It's interesting. One guy, he became a healer. Another guy, he's doing psychic readings. Another guy built an energy-free type motor, sort of a perpetual motion type thing.
Exactly. Well, I am happy to, that we've had you on here. I want to thank you so much for being on the show, but we did reach to the top of at the end of the show, so I want to thank you so much for being a part of this and sharing the great information from your book and from the experiencers and everything, because there's so much we can still learn.
Hey, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
I'm sorry that we lost Christina offline. We've been trying to get her back, but oh well. That's why she has a co-host to help close the show, I guess.
Yeah, well.
All right.
I thought it went.
It went beautiful. And we can hardly wait to have you back on again.
Hey, anytime. Yeah, I had a blast.
All right. Okay, thank you. And I want to thank everybody out there who are listening to the show. And sorry we lost Christina, but hey, I am on the co-pilot seat and I'm flying it now, so I better take this baby out to land, and we'll catch you next week. And so until then,